Welcome to the Common Man Football Show. My name is James Coburn, and today's episode we're going to be talking about Kirk Cousins. That's right. You like that. You like that. Kirk Cousins. And the reason I want to talk about Kirk Cousins is because he's a very hotly debated prospect amongst many people on draft Twitter, NFL Twitter, all around, in terms of, do you pay him a lot of money? How much money do you pay him? Is he a franchise quarterback? All this kind of stuff around Kirk Cousins as a quarterback. So I figure, you know what? Let's go through his data, his analytics, because I think when it comes to Kirk Cousins, there's a lot of positives to his data. There's a lot of positives to his analytics. There's a lot of things that point towards the fact that he may not be like a generational quarterback per se. But there are a lot of things in general to where he's been an above-average quarterback consistently for the last 2 seasons and should be compensated as such. So I would say that that's the only sort of thing to kind of get into is, first of all, what his numbers were coming out of college, because I think that's very important to get a good idea of what the potential is for that type of player is from high school and college data, because it shows up in the college and high school data. And then, of course, we'll get into what he's actually done in the NFL, specifically the last 2 seasons on the Washington Redskins. And then ultimately come to the conclusion, how much money do you pay him? What do you do with a guy like Kirk Cousins? All that kind of stuff. The main things you need to know is high school production. The high school production score is essentially the touchdown to interception ratio and completion percentage scored against peers. So you take that number and you compare it to all the peers in high school, and that gives you that number there. The college production score takes into account all those things, touchdown to interception ratio, completion percentage, but adds a layer of strength of schedule to the data to figure out how productive they were for their schedule. Because obviously if you're in college and you're playing like the MAC or the AAC competition, you're going to have better stats. Like, you're going to put up better numbers because you're not necessarily playing the strongest of competitions. And I feel like strength of schedule does kind of separate those fluky guys from kind of minor conferences who produce a lot versus other guys who actually play. And also, plus guys who play really tough competition and put up good numbers, but they just kind of get lost in the sauce because of the fact that they played in a very tough conference. So I figured all those kind of numbers are kind of basis for all that kind of stuff. The other sort of thing too is PDF is point differential, and that is pretty self-explanatory too. I normalize the number because I don't want to be like, well, he played on a team that had a 50% point differential. Like, I just figured, I want to normalize this number, so I went back to the 2002 year of NFL and normalize that number just so it makes sense that this is the higher you score on point differential means the higher that your point differential score is. The lower your score is, the more likely you were that you had a negative point differential in terms of the points that you forced and the points that you allowed. So I figured that's another sort of thing just to explain, and I'll explain it further when we get to that point. But those are all the numbers we're going to be using. And now let's get to what Kirk Cousins looked like coming out of high school and college. So to first start off, Kirk Cousins, when it comes to his high school production, he had a 69.17 out of 100. And that score, based on previous players, is the starter threshold when it comes to high school production at that level. 100% of long-term starters since the 2007 NFL draft class had at least a score of 69 in terms of their high school production score, and Kirk Cousins meets that threshold. He doesn't, however, meet the multiple Pro Bowl threshold of 84 or higher, which every single multiple Pro Bowl player since the 2007 NFL draft class had at least an 84 or higher in terms of the high school production score. Kirk Cousins did not have that type of number. But there are some things to point to the fact, which we'll get into in his NFL production, that he may buck the trend. He may actually be sort of an outlier when it comes to this data. But the bottom line is based on his data, he meets the minimum qualities of a starting quarterback based on his data. Then we get into his college production, FBS stat score. And based on his FBS test score, he had a 79.63 out of 100, which doesn't meet the Pro Bowl threshold when it comes to college production, but it's really close. I mean, 79.63 is, it's less than half a point away from hitting the Pro Bowl threshold. So when it comes to his college production too, he had very good stats. I mean, his stats were fairly decent, above average, and he does hit at least the starter threshold when it comes to long-term starters, which the lowest of the low in terms of that threshold is 26 out of 100. That's guys like Jake Delhomme and guys like that. So he's higher than that. So that you shouldn't have to worry about that. But yeah, the bottom line is when it comes to Kirk Cousins, is when you look at his high school production, hits the starter threshold. You look at his college production, hits the starter threshold. It is almost at the Pro Bowl threshold, and in many ways, this is kind of why I think some people kind of doubt him a bit, is because of his numbers coming out, because of this specifically, and also maybe some things on film as well. But the bottom line is, when he came out of the draft in 2012, everything on paper looked like a starter quarterback. So I would say that, and also he's been a starter quarterback, right now. So at least the last 2 seasons. So I feel like that's sort of a good floor for him, is that he's at least a starter quarterback when it comes to his data coming out of high school and college. Then when we get to his NFL production, he's been really, really good. Now, just to explain, the numbers I'm going to be comparing his numbers to are the averages for quarterbacks with 90 percentile or higher wins, 80 percentile or higher wins, and 50 percentile or higher wins. Essentially, 90 percentile or higher wins are teams that have quarterbacks who win. These are teams that are typically like 12 wins, 13 wins, division winners. These are teams that usually get a bye week. They don't have to go to the wild card playoff. Essentially, those are teams that usually end up in the 90 percentile or higher in terms of wins. 80 percentile or higher is usually teams that are 10 wins, 11 wins, those types of teams. And then 50 or higher is, of course, 500 teams. So win percentile teams that are 50 percentile or higher are teams that are 500 or better when it comes to their data, at least when it comes to their wins. So those are the numbers we're going to be comparing Kirk Cousins' numbers in the NFL to, just to see where he stacks up. Is he producing? How is he producing? What are some things that he may lag behind in terms of his statistics on paper? And starting with his completion percentage, which is by far his best sort of trait when it comes to data. Very good completion percentage. He's had above average completion percentage in terms of 90 percentile or higher wins for the last 2 seasons, from 2016 to 2015. When you get to his touchdown to interception ratio, in 2016 he had a below 50 or higher wins, kind of a below average in 2016 when it came to touchdown to interception ratio. But in 2015 he had a 80 percentile or higher win sort of production in terms of touchdown to interception ratio in 2015. In terms of his yards per attempt, despite the fact that people kind of call him a quarterback who kills you with the small stuff and stuff like that, he's actually been pretty good in terms of his yards per attempt. He was pretty much above average, above the 90 percentile or higher win threshold in 2016. 2015 he hit at least the 80 percentile or higher, sort of above average that particular threshold in 2015. In terms of his adjusted yards per attempt, he's pretty much been in the 80 percentile range, above average of the 80 percentile or higher range when it comes to adjusted yards per attempt. And his quarterback rating as well has been 80 percentile or higher for the most part during the majority of his career. And in 2015, he had his highest with a 90 percentile or higher win, above average when it came to his quarterback rating compared to his peers. And then when it comes to his third down percentage, which is by far one of his best sort of things as well, he's been really good in terms of his third down conversion rate compared to other quarterbacks. He's been above the 90 percentile, above the 80 percentile, and above the 50 percentile higher win range when it comes to his third down percentage scoring. which essentially means that he's been producing in terms of third down conversions like a quarterback who typically wins 90 percentile or higher wins, 12 wins, 13 wins, 14 wins. So the bottom line is, when you look at his data, the one thing you'll notice, I think that strikes me, is that most of his data is above average. The only thing that really was below the 50 percentile or higher win range was his touchdown to interception ratio, which was in 2016. But the rest of his data was above average of 80 percentile or higher wins, which is what you want. You want a quarterback who's putting up the types of stats indicative of a quarterback who's winning 10, 11, 12 games. And unfortunately, the Washington Redskins have not got to that point yet, because his win percentile with Kirk Cousins has been more so 55.24 in 2016 and then 65.10 in 2015. So he's not exactly been killing it. He's not been getting into the 80 percentile or higher or 50%. Well, he's been at least a 50 percentile or higher wins sort of categories, but he hasn't really been getting into that 80 percentile or higher range. And you might go, well, that's indicative of a problem, right, James? And I would say not so. And the reason why is because now we're going to get into kind of point differential. But in terms of 90 percentile wins, the average point differential for teams that are like that is 91.11 in terms of their point differential, meaning that they usually force a lot of points and don't allow a lot of points for teams who win that many games. This is teams usually are winning the division, getting a bye week. 80 percentile wins are typically 85.12 in terms of point differential. 50 percentile or higher wins are usually 71.33 in terms of their point differential. So above average of what point differential usually is where you'll find teams who are above 500 consistently. And when you look at the Redskins, over the last 2 seasons, their point differential has been 52.92 in 2016 and 51.46 in 2015. Again, this is normalized. This is basically a normalized score where it compares all the point differentials from 2002 to 2016 is what that kind of looks at. So the bottom line is when you look at Kirk Cousins in terms of data, in terms of his production, he's been an above-average productive player in every single category, with only 1 year in particular where his touchdown to interception ratio wasn't really that great. But his point differential on his team as a whole has not been making it. Making me kind of question, is Kirk Cousins the problem here, or is there other factors involved? Because whenever you have a quarterback who's like this, and just for example, when you look at all the quarterbacks who kind of produced similar to Kirk Cousins, but were on teams that had, point differentials that were kind of in his same range, you have guys like Dante Culpepper 2004, Drew Brees in I think that's 2016. Of course, Drew Brees again in 2012. And you have to understand, this is Drew Brees. Drew Brees, this quarterback, Drew Brees, who is considered to be one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And when he's on a team that has a defense that isn't that great, he's not winning a lot of games. If you look at the teams that have point differentials like that, it doesn't even matter how well your quarterback performs in terms of stats. They're still going to barely reach 500 when you have teams that are like this. And I think in Kirk Cousins' case, when you look at him, it's surprising that the Washington Redskins were even able to get above 500, in terms of their win score, based on the data here. So I would say that when you look at Kirk Cousins, the reasons why the wins haven't come, despite the fact that his stats have been so good, is because of the team that's around him. The defense is not exactly doing what it needs to do in terms of its job. There may be sort of issues in terms of, maybe not offense, but when you look at this on paper, what you should immediately be drawn to is the fact that if you're on a team that has a point differential like this, it doesn't matter how well your quarterback's doing, they're not going to be winning a ton of games. When you have this type of situation, when you have a team that is not forcing more points than allowing, you're going to have this sort of issue. So I would say when it comes to Kirk Cousins, that is probably one of the central issues when it comes to him as a player is how do you deal with this sort of issue of, you are a quarterback who produces really well, you have a really good completion percentage, you're doing everything you need to do, your third down conversion rate is tremendous in terms of your ability to convert on third down, but you're still on a team that is not putting up enough points on the board, or at least not, on top of that, just allowing too many points to kind of even stuff out so that you win more games. So I would say in Kirk Cousins' case, just from a data perspective, he doesn't look like a quarterback that's just producing high numbers and it's his fault they're losing football games. I would say the reason that the Washington Redskins haven't been winning as many football games as they probably should is because of the defense, because of other factors that have nothing to do with Kirk Cousins. So ultimately, your next question is going to be, well, how much do you pay Kirk Cousins? Because he's going to get paid. I would honestly say he needs to just get out of the situation there, because there seems to be a clear sort of indication that they don't love him, or I don't know. But I just feel like, because they haven't been so gung-ho in getting him re-signed and have just been kind of, letting his contract keep coming up and just franchise tagging him and stuff like that, that they're not tremendously serious in him long term, which I think is a shame. But if they actually are going to change their mindset, which I hope they do, I would say Kirk Cousins is worth above average quarterback money. Now, how much is that? Well, based on the recent data, obviously Derek Carr is now the highest paid in terms of salary, $25 million a year. But there's some wiggle room there where between the 100 percentile, which is $25 million, and the 75 percentile, which is around, just to double check, it's $21 million. I think there's some wiggle room there where you can kind of shoot, because his quarterback play has been between that 100 percentile and 75 percentile range in terms of his quarterback play. I would probably shoot somewhere in between there. Probably $22.5 million a year would be good compensation for his quarterback play. And if you want to add incentives and stuff like that, you can. But based on how he's been performing, he's worth $22.5 million a year based on the market that we have currently. So that is kind of the salary I would be shooting for, is about $22 million, 22.5, around there, based on his quarterback play. But yeah, the bottom line is, when it comes to Kirk Cousins, I think when you look at his data in terms of his production, and production in every single facet, he's been above average of what most quarterbacks who win a ton of games usually end up at. And I just think that this team, if it can just grow and get better and improve around him, I think that this team, based on the way that Kirk Cousins is performing, if this team gets better, it has the potential to become a really good team, at least a Saints-like team, where the Saints are always this sort of team that has a year where it's just kind of bad because the defense isn't really doing what it needs to do, but the offense kind of does what it needs to do. So I would say that this is kind of like what the Redskins are looking right now. They're looking like a team that has a very good offense, but the defense is just not getting it done in terms of what it needs to do. And I think that you pay Kirk Cousins about $22.5 million a year. You focus most of your efforts on improving that defense. And I think if you do those things, if the defense can get better, if all these other sort of factors can get better, I think that this team will actually start winning football games, and you'll be happy that you paid Kirk Cousins what you paid him, because when you looked at his data coming out of college, he definitely just has a starter threshold. But based on how he's performing right now, and he's still a young guy, he's only going to be 29 years old this year for 2017. I still think that you need to compensate a guy like that. I still think you need to have that guy around, because he's been performing like an above-average quarterback for the last 2 seasons, despite the issues on that team in terms of point differential. And I think you keep him around, and you ultimately get better in terms of the rest of the team, and I think the wins will follow if you do that. So that's just my general idea on it based on his analytics. But if I was a GM that's what I would do. I would look at the fact that he is a very productive player. Where he's on a team in particular that just unfortunately doesn't get the point differential right for whatever reason. There's other factors that kind of get into that, which I won't really do in this video, but the point differential is not where it needs to be. He's not really the cause of it because of how he's performing based on the data. He's not. So ultimately, this is just a situation where the team around him is not as good as it needs to be, and you should focus on that, pay him, keep him around, and then hopefully in a couple years, if not sooner, you'll finally start to see more consistent victories and be a more dominant football team than you have in the last 2 years. So again, my name is James Coburn. You can find my work at draftcoburn.wordpress.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Geometrics. And if you like this content and you want more content like this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Share this video as well with anybody that you know, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video. Peace.